EVO. Welcome back to the Ides of April. This is The Dagger and the Crown, the assassination of Francisco Pizarro. So I'm not sure if you noticed, but I'm dropping episode 1 of these shows into the Devil Within feed, hoping to, build an audience. And then episode 2 is only going to be available on the Ides of April feed. So make sure you're following the Ides of April on Apple or Spotify or YouTube so you can hear part 2 of the story. June 26, 1541, the conqueror of the Inca Empire, Francisco Pizarro, hero, tyrant, governor, visionary, butcher, chosen of kings, betrayer of his own blood, bleeds out on the floor of his palace in Lima. 4 daggers, one name whispered. Revenge. This series traces the rise and fall of a man who carved a kingdom from mountains and myth, only to be undone by the same hunger for power that built it. Not by emperors, not by armies, by his own fellow conquistadors, the last loyal sons of a broken brotherhood. This is The Dagger and the Crown, Chapter 1, When Gold First Sang. Tell me what company thou keepest, and I'll tell thee what thou art. Cervantes was not merely diagnosing character in that line. He was whispering a quiet warning about destiny. We imagine we steer our own lives with sovereign certainty. Yet more often, the path is shaped by those who walk beside us. The brothers born into our world, the comrades we choose, the voices we mistake for truth because they echo the longings already living within us. Francisco Pizarro would become many things: conqueror, governor, founder of a nation. But before all that, he was simply one man shaped by the company of other hungry men. And hunger, when shared among brothers, can feel suspiciously like fate. History likes its beginnings dramatic: a flag raised, a blade drawn, a coronation, or a cry of war. But most beginnings are quieter, formed in the long accumulation of want. Before the palaces of Lima and the bitter civil war of conquistadors, before the ransom room stacked with glittering metal, and the emperor brought low beneath the Spanish cross, there was a boy born in a harsh and unforgiving corner of Spain, a place where the earth yielded nothing without a fight, and dreams had to be pried from the soil like reluctant stones. To understand the man who would bend empires, we first need to understand the land that bent him. Extremadura, around the turn of the 16th century, was a country of stubborn earth and stubborn men, a frontier of rocky plains and weather-beaten villages where even God seemed to ration his favors. Wheat grew only by the grace of sweat, and water clung to wells as if reluctant to leave them. It was a place that produced soldiers more readily than scholars, because books can't fill empty stomachs, and hunger is a tutor far older and more persuasive than scripture. It was here that Francisco Pizarro learned his first truths: that fortune belongs to those bold enough to seize it, that status is a cage built for the meek, and that the world has never been gentle to those born out of wedlock and raised without the protection of noble blood. His father, a cavalier of modest means and greater appetite, acknowledged his son without embracing his burden. His mother, a woman of quieter circumstance, taught him the value of silence and the peril of expecting more than the world wished to give. In that hard classroom of rock and sun, the young Pizarro absorbed the first lesson that would guide his life. If birth couldn't crown him, conquest would. But no man truly rises alone. Francisco had brothers, sons of the same father, though not always the same mother, bound not so much by love as by the shared understanding that destiny would never come looking for them. Hernando, fierce and exacting, Gonzalo, bold and handsome as a knight from an old poem, Juan, eager and earnest, and Francisco, the quiet and relentless one, who listened more than he spoke and carried his ambitions like coals banked beneath ash. In another life, they may have tilled the same fields and died within sight of the same church bell tower. But Europe was beginning to whisper of wonders beyond the horizon. Lands where gold wasn't a rumor, but a river. Where kings might be toppled by steel and audacity, and where even men of humble beginnings might carve out fortunes large enough to shame dukes. When tales of the New World drifted across tavern tables and reached the ears of those Pizarro brothers, they didn't hear possibility. They heard inevitability. It's fashionable to imagine that Pizarro and his companions sailed with clear purpose and divine certainty. But most revolutions and conquests began not with clarity, but with yearning. They went because others had gone. Because Columbus had opened a door and Cortez had walked through it into legend. And legends are difficult company for ambitious men to keep without growing restless themselves. Pizarro didn't set out seeking Peru as we know it. Peru wasn't yet a place in the Spanish imagination. It was a dream whispered by sailors and merchants. A kingdom of wealth hidden in mountains taller than cathedrals, where the sun was worshipped in temples sheathed in gold. Half rumor, half longing, it shimmered like a mirage on the far edge of possibility. And to a man shaped by scarcity, even a mirage can become a destination if the alternative is a life forgotten. So he gathered companions, men who weren't saints and didn't pretend to be, men who equated honor with opportunity and salvation with success. And together, they set their eyes on that horizon. Not for glory, not for God, but for the simple human belief that the world owed them more than it had yet delivered. When Francisco Pizarro stepped out onto the creaking planks of the ship that would carry him across the Atlantic, he carried almost nothing that the old world valued. No noble title, no education, no poetic lineage that could trace itself to saints or kings. What he possessed instead was a quiet, unyielding conviction that the world was clay, and he had been born with the hands that could shape it. The crossing was long and cruel and indifferent to mortal ambition. Men died in the cramped darkness below decks, claimed by fever or despair or the simple fatigue of hoping for too long without reward. But Pizarro endured, not because he believed in divine purpose, but because the time he left behind had offered him no throne to fall back upon. A man who has burned his past learns quickly to not fear the flame. And so the sea didn't daunt him. The sea baptized him. When at last the sails dipped toward land, he stepped ashore not as the boy from Extremadura, but as a man who had wagered hunger against destiny and meant to collect in full. If history teaches anything, it's that ambition rarely begins as evil. It begins as hunger. The same hunger that drives peasants to pray for rain, poets to chase inspiration, and soldiers to seek a banner worth dying beneath. Pizarro didn't yet know that the empire he dreamed of building would one day rise from ruins and rest uneasily upon his memory. He didn't yet see the shadow of betrayal stretching toward him from the future, not carried by his enemies, but carried by the company he kept and the brothers who once shared his fire. For now, he was only a man with an empty hand reaching toward a golden horizon, certain that fate awaited him there, certain that the world would one day remember his name. And it would, though not always kindly. In the quiet hours when the candle burns low and history leans in close, we can almost hear the first tremor of destiny in his footsteps. The sound of gold beginning to sing to a man who believed it could crown him, and who never imagined it might one day be the instrument of his undoing. Chapter 2. The Shackled Sun. For neither good nor evil can last forever. And so, has evil lasted a long time, good must now be close at hand. That's a little bit more from Don Quixote, where Cervantes writes with the faith of a man who has seen suffering enough to crave its end, and yet still believes in cycles. That misery eventually crests, that wickedness once spent falls like a spent tide. But history offers us no such guarantees. Men don't always rise to goodness simply because they have exhausted their cruelty. Sometimes cruelty multiplies itself, as though breeding in the dark. Sometimes the moment when one life seems ready to turn toward light is the instant another life is thrust into shadow, shackled to fate by someone else's hunger. In the mountains of Peru, where the sun was worshipped as divine, the line between deliverance and damnation did not fall evenly. There are moments in history when entire civilizations hang suspended in a breath. A single pause before the world becomes something else. The meeting between Francisco Pizarro and Atahualpa, sovereign of the Inca world, was one such moment. It didn't feel like destiny to the men who lived it. Destiny is a word that we apply later, when the consequences have ripened and we have the arrogance to say that we understand them. In truth, they stood not at the march of destiny, but at the precipice of two irreconcilable worlds. One forged in the crucible of Spanish ambition, the other carved in the high stone and sacred ceremony of Andean empire. And in that fragile space between them, less than a heartbeat in the long chronology of time, the sun didn't rise or fall. It waited, watching men decide what sort of world they believed that they deserved. Atahualpa was not a king in the European sense. He was the living son of the sun, Inti made flesh, ruler by divine right and cosmic continuity. To his people, he was not simply obeyed, he was believed in. The empire that bowed to him stretched from the cradle valleys of the Quito to the southern reaches of the Andes, bound by roads older than memory and a bureaucracy so intricate that even scholars today marvel at its precision. He arrived in Cajamarca in ceremonial splendor, gold shimmering on garments like morning fire, attendants bearing tribute, warriors confident in the might of an empire that had never known true defeat. The Spaniards, ragged and starved from months of hardship, looked upon this display and didn't see divinity. They saw invitation. Wealth beyond imagining. A god, yes, but a god unarmed, stepping, perhaps unknowingly, into the narrow corridors of European ambition. Pizarro extended a greeting with words dipped in civility and steel. The pages of history record the priest advancing with a cross and a Bible, a symbolic offering of salvation wrapped in the arrogance of conquest. When Atahualpa accepted neither, not out of ignorance, but out of absolute certainty in his own cosmology, the trap closed, and a square suddenly filled with smoke and terror, where drums of war were replaced by the thunder of muskets and the scream of cavalry horses against stone, the son of the sun was seized by mortal hands, and in that instant, the air in the Andes changed. A world shifted off its axis. It's hard to comprehend the scale of the room where Atahualpa would mark the wall with his own height, promising to fill the space up to that line with gold if only the Spaniards would grant his return to freedom. Gold, not as ornament, but as faith. Inca gold wasn't currency. It was devotion, a holy metal meant to honor the divine, not to be hoarded by mortal greed. Yet the Spaniards, shaped by a culture ravaged by centuries of war and debt, didn't see a sacred offering. They saw payment. They saw gleaming absolution for risk and hardship. They saw the miraculous possibility that a man could be born in poverty and die in palaces, so long as he had the will and the ruthlessness to take from others what the world had denied him. And the ransom came. Piece by piece, idol by idol, a kingdom soul melted down to satisfy the hunger of strangers. And somewhere in that slow parade of gold, as artisans wept and priests prayed and nobles bartered with their gods for deliverance, the Inca world came undone. Not by defeat on the battlefield, but by humiliation in the heart. And still, it wasn't enough. Not enough gold, not enough obedience, not enough surrender to satisfy the bottomless hunger of men who had known want for too long. Atahualpa, once radiant in power, was now a prisoner, studied like an artifact, and judged like a rival monarch. His captors debated his fate not with awe, but with calculation. Pizarro saw in him both legitimacy and also a threat. A released emperor might rally millions. A dead one might seal Spanish rule, but at the cost of a stain that would cling to every future conquest. Men often reach turning points believing they're choosing prudence over passion. History, however, remembers these decisions as prophecy. When the Council of Spaniards chose death for Atahualpa, strangulation by Garrett, that terrible marriage of mercy and brutality, they believed they were securing their empire. Instead, they baptized it in the blood of a sacred king and forged a curse that would follow them across every mountain and into every valley they attempted to rule. Even Pizarro, who spent his life learning that pity was a luxury the world afforded only the powerful, he said to have looked upon Atahualpa's body with a rare flicker of unease. For in killing a god, he had become something colder than a conqueror. He had become inevitable. And inevitability is often indistinguishable from tragedy. The sun didn't rise warmly over Cajamarca the morning after Atahualpa's death. It climbed the sky like a witness unwilling to speak. In villages and temples, in terraces carved by hands long gone to dust, a nation woke to a world that no longer obeyed the rhythms ordained by ancestors and stars. The Spaniards had not simply conquered a ruler. They had broken a covenant between a people and the cosmos. And if Cervantes was right, that evil exhausts itself and yields to good, then this moment sits uneasily in that philosophy. For the gold flowed, and the empire expanded, and Pizarro stood closer than ever to the summit he had imagined in childhood. The cresting of a long and ruthless climb. But standing at the top of the world is often the most dangerous place a man can be. For from that height, every threat looks like treachery, every shadow like a blade, and every brother like destiny wearing a familiar face. In the ransom room, in the quiet after the garret, in the lingering incense of an empire's grief, the story of Francisco Pizarro ceased to be merely about conquest. It became a story about consequences. And consequences, unlike gold, don't melt when the world gets hot. They endure. They wait. And one day, they collect.
If your dog could talk, they'd beg for Ollie. The full-body tail wag, the excited little hops, the big, goofy grin, that's the Ollie effect. Ollie delivers clean, fresh nutrition in 5 drool-worthy flavors, even for the pickiest eaters. Made in U.S. kitchens with highest quality human-grade ingredients, Ollie's food contains no fillers, no preservatives, just real food. And here's the thing. Healthier food means a happier pup, more energy, shinier coats, and more excitement at mealtime. With 5 protein-packed recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes or fresh turkey with blueberries, even the pickiest eaters can't resist. You might think my dog eats better than I do, and that's probably true when it comes to Ollie. Get your welcome kit. For any first-timers, Ollie will send out your pup's first box with 2 weeks' worth of meals, a free storage container for mess-free serving, and a guide of how to gradually switch them over to their new diet. Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. Head to ollie.com/IDES. Tell them all about your dog and use code IDES to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/IDES and enter IDES to get 60% off your first box. Quick question. Could you list every financial account you have right now? Your 401k, checking, savings, investments, maybe even that old retirement account from a job 10 years ago? Most people can't. And that lack of awareness usually means money is being left on the table. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that organizes your entire financial life in one clean dashboard on your phone or laptop. In minutes, you can link all your accounts, see where your money is going, and get smart visuals that make the big picture clear. No more juggling apps, no more spreadsheets. Monarch is designed for people with busy lives. It helps you save more, invest smarter, and actually feel in control of your money. That's why it's been named Best Budgeting App of 2025 by the Wall Street Journal, Forbes Best App for Couples, and even recognized by CNBC as one of the top fintech companies in the world. So stop guessing, stop leaving money on the table, and start feeling confident about your finances. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code IDES at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code IDES.
Chapter 3. Twins divided, brothers broken. There is no recollection which time does not put an end to, and no pain which death does not remove. Here, Cervantes speaks as though time were a balm, smoothing the jagged memories of ambition and sorrow. Yet for some men, and some empires, time doesn't soften. It corrodes. It turns recollection into judgment and wounds into monuments. Death may take pain, yes, but only from the dead. For the living, it leaves inheritance, unfinished business, festering jealousy, and the knowledge that whoever stands at the summit seldom stands there alone, and never for long. By the time the last echoes of Atahualpa's life faded into the Andes, Francisco Pizarro no longer resembled the man who once walked the dusty lanes of Extremadura, dreaming of a place in the world. He had conquered an empire of gods in stone, seized a kingdom that stretched beyond the horizon, and stood at the head of a realm where gold flowed like melted sunlight. Yet power, once grasped, does not simply crown, it divides. To break an empire is one triumph, to hold it is another completely. And to share it, that's the rarest grace of all, and one Pizarro frankly didn't possess. He'd not been alone in carving Peru open. His brothers in arms, and one brother in spirit though not in blood, had marched beside him. But in that soft glow of triumph, there grows a shadow. The shadow of entitlement, of doubt, of kinship strained by the cruel mathematics of glory. For every empire forged by comradeship, there comes a moment when brothers look at one another and realize that the world they sought together just isn't big enough for both of them. Diego de Almagro entered Pizarro's life not as a rival, but as a mirror. Older, seasoned, hardened by the same gnawing hunger that Spain's forgotten sons carried like a second heartbeat. If Pizarro was carved from silence and stubborn will, Almagro was shaped from fire and restless yearning. Where one calculated, the other leaped. Where one hid feeling behind iron restraint, the other wore his heart and his pride right out in the open. Together they had stood at the edge of the unknown continent and chosen risk over retreat, had chosen hunger over comfort, and the possibility of immortality over safety. When the world first whispered the word Peru, they had been brothers, bonded not by blood but by belief. But conquest does not reward equally, and memory has teeth. Pizarro secured titles, governorship, and the right to rule from the city of kings itself. Almagro, though honored in parchment and ceremony, felt the imbalance like a stone in the boot, small at first, then unbearable, until each step of triumph carried a quiet bruise beneath it. Resentment, like gold, gleams before it corrodes. And no resentment burns hotter than that of a companion who fears he's been written out of the story that he helped to write. Family had always been both shield and blade to Francisco. Hernando, sharp as judgment, Juan, eager for approval. Gonzalo, handsome and fierce, born to command men by sheer force of will and presence. Together, they formed a closed world, a dynasty in embryo. The new world was vast, but the Pizarros didn't plan to share it with the generosity that history might have applauded. Almagro found, slowly and painfully, that he was no longer brother, but guest. And in time, a guest who had overstayed the comfort of host and household. Whispers grew in barracks and on mountain roads. Men who had bled for conquest found themselves choosing loyalties not based on honor, but based on remembered kindnesses or forgotten slights. Some looked to Pizarro and found discipline and destiny. Others looked to Almagro and saw passion and promise. An empire had been won, but another, quieter war had begun. A war of hearts curdling into grievance, of alliances fraying not in battlefields, but in banquet halls and courtyards. This is how civil wars are born, not in shouts, but in glances. Not in clashes, but in absences. A chair removed from the table, a word spoken without warmth, a future imagined without the other. Cusco, the navel of the Inca world, ancient seat of emperors, a city wrapped in legends older than Spanish scripture. That became the crucible in which loyalty dissolved. Awarded first in theory to Almagro, then pulled back into the orbit of Pizarro ambition, the city became a symbol heavy enough to crack friendship like bone. Almagro seized Cusco not merely for power, but for dignity, for the right to say, I'm more than a partner, I'm equal. And in that act, in that seizing of stone and crown, he crossed a threshold from which neither he or Pizarro could ever return. Pizarro saw rebellion, where Almagro saw justice. And the men who followed each saw prophecy, each convinced that only one could truly inherit the world they had torn from another people's hands. The Inca, watching the quarrel unfold, saw something else entirely. They just saw fate. They saw the gods deliver what the gods always deliver to those who break cosmic order. A kingdom divided against itself. There is a moment in every tragedy when the audience knows what the characters don't know. When every word feels like foreshadowing, every gesture like the tightening of a noose. Pizarro and Almagro still spoke, they still negotiated, still insisted that they were brothers in purpose. But the world around them had already chosen sides. Letters sharpened, messengers disappeared. Men sharpened blades under the guise of routine. And at night, in the halls of Lima and the fortress stones of Cusco, the old Inca gods must have murmured to one another that the invaders had begun to pay the price of arrogance, without even realizing they had been summoned to judgment. History loves to speak of betrayal as sudden, but betrayal is more often a slow installation, a drip of doubt in the bloodstream, a tightening in the chest, a long rehearsal for the inevitable blow. By the time swords were drawn in earnest, the break had already happened in the hearts of the men who once shared triumph. And the blood that would soon stain the mountain stones was not Inca blood, but Spanish. Brothers in hunger, brothers in conquest, brothers now in ruin. There are wars we choose, and there are wars we inherit. But the war between Francisco Pizarro and Diego Almagro was neither. It was a war they created together, nurtured like a bitter child, until it stood between them as a living thing. And again, maybe Cervantes was right that time heals all recollection and death ends all pain. But before that gentle erasure arrives, there's a long season in which memory cuts deeper than steel, and wounds inflicted by brothers never truly close. The empire was theirs, but soon the graveyards would be also. In the mountains where gods had once walked, two conquerors prepared to destroy the only people who truly understood them, each other. And as the Andean wind carried whispers across stone terraces and temple walls, one truth settled like winter frost upon the land. The hunger that builds empires is rarely the hunger that sustains them. And a crown placed on one brow is already a threat to the brother who once dreamed beside him. The blade was coming. But first, the choice to draw it. This has been The Dagger and the Crown, the Assassination of Francisco Pizarro, an Evio Creative historical miniseries. If the story moved you, if these echoes of ambition and betrayal and legacy linger with you, follow, rate, and share the show. Your support brings the next series to life. Explore the Evio slate of long-form narrative storytelling: The Devil Within, Criminal Mischief, Taboo Treasures, The Devil's Ledger, and The Ides of April. For more, visit eviocreative.com and follow us on Instagram at The Devil Within Pod, at Ides of April Pod, at taboo_treasures, and at Evio Creative. So even legends require patrons. And our work, all these voices, these hours by lamplight, these journeys into memory, is made possible by partners who believe in storytelling as deeply as you do. Monarch: empires rise and fall on how well their treasuries are managed. Fortunately, your kingdom is simpler. Monarch makes personal finance human, powerful, and beautifully clear. Take control of your realm. Go to monarchmoney.com/Ides for 50% off your first year. Even conquistadors would agree, loyalty deserves to be well fed. With fresh, vet-crafted meals for your four-legged companions, Ollie keeps modern guardians and their loyal subjects thriving. Get 60% off your first box at ollie.com/Ides. Until next time, remember, history is never past, it's only patient, and the shadows of yesterday still move beneath our feet. We'll meet you in the next chapter.